Hey everyone, here for another episode of the New Stack Makers. Today, my guest is Jonas Emilsson. He is concept manager for hybrid platforms at Atea. He's coming to us from Sweden. Hello, Jonas. How are you today?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, everything is good over here. I'm happy to be on the show.
Thanks for joining us. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about Atea, what Atea does, and our discussion will primarily focus on thinking about these new environments that customers are adopting. And you and I were chatting about the changes that are afoot in the market. We can't ignore the fact that everyone is at home right now.
Sure.
And it's putting some different changes in priorities. But I'd like to use that as a way to frame the market and how Atea, as a major IT services firm serving the Nordics and the Baltics, is focusing its approach. You've largely served organizations that have major enterprise operations. These are companies that are looking at their IT again. And I'm wondering about the market trends. I'm wondering about how you're seeing things evolve in the Nordic States and really thinking of that in terms of Kubernetes and what are the drivers behind it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I usually tell the customers that I speak to that we've seen a greater market change over the last 2 years probably than we've seen in the last 10. And it's true in a way because a lot of the stuff that was going on before had to do with proprietary technology, basically, that sort of put the end user or the user in themselves a little bit in a stale environment. So when the shift towards software-defined data centers and Kubernetes, of course, for software development, we've seen a greater change in the market in terms of how customers and users in general are using the technology. And a lot of it lies within the software-defined data center, of course. That's a huge thing for us. We do a lot of business with self-service portals, as I was mentioning earlier. We do automation, we do Kubernetes, enterprise PKS from VMware, for example, stuff like that. So a lot of the stuff that we do now are actually software-based, but they are in themselves driving the hardware industry forward as well. So it's not like a digital on-off scenario where you suddenly shift to software. It's more of a complementary thing where software is complementing the software in a good way, and that the actual end user experience is in focus in a greater way than before.
The end user experience is in focus more than ever before. Yeah. And we were chatting a little bit about how that's particularly evident over the past few months.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, I'm sure that we're seeing this globally, but what we're seeing here in Scandinavia is that the need for remote users, for example, is a big thing. Anything from virtual desktops to remote infrastructure to whatever you can do to support your delivery of IT systems on a remote basis. And that goes to even for self-service portals, like talking about the VMware stack, for example. We realize automation technology like that sort of digitizes the service catalog or the delivery of software for the IT department. That is really come into play, and we're seeing a lot of demand for that hasn't been there before. So presumably related to the COVID-19 virus and the way that people are living now within their homes rather than at the workplace.
What are you seeing from the public sector and from healthcare? I'm thinking about those organizations that are really on the front lines right now, who are needing to really have state of the art.
Absolutely, and we sort of saw that coming a little bit beforehand. Actually, this isn't just related to COVID or the coronavirus, but we're seeing a lot of the public sector customers, like healthcare, for example. That's a good vertical to describe. They're developing software and applications and systems, basically supporting a more mobile user experience. Applications that are being run at remote or mobile devices like tablets or telephones or whatever is in focus. And then also that brings the shift over to Kubernetes and container-based technology in a greater way than we've seen ever before, actually.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you're thinking about the market overall, are there any sectors that are leading in the adoption of Kubernetes? And What are some of their main use cases now?
Yeah, that's a funny thing actually. We always thought when we sort of looked at the market and say, okay, this is where it's going to be happening first, that the private sector would be the leader. But ironically, or not really, what was in our plan at least, is that the public sector is taking lead. And there's a lot of development going on, from anything from municipalities to healthcare industry to the actual hospitals that does the caretaking of the patients. So definitely public sector, and definitely in areas where we haven't seen it, like the transport industry, for example, or transport organizations within the municipalities, for example, like bus companies and stuff like that, where people need to be mobile. And of course, from the healthcare sector, it's a lot about supporting the care of the patients from wherever location you might be on. So container-based technology is definitely a keyword here, and I think that's going to be sticking with us for quite some time.
So container-based technology is getting adopted, and these agencies, for example, the mass transit organizations, the transport organizations, as you call them,
right,
are becoming more, are really starting to adopt more technologies. Any particular reasons why the transport industry or transport sector?
We haven't done any real market research on it, but you can always speculate. And I mean, a lot of the things that's coming from the from companies like taxi companies, no one forgotten, basically, private companies that offer apps to order to taxis or cars. That's sort of affecting the whole industry. And then the public sector side wants to do their part as well, of course, and that's the demand from the customers, I think.
So these companies that you serve, how large are they? What's the scale of their IT operations? And how large are the teams that they have? And they must have been organized in ways that kind of reflected, a market where they were building on systems of record, and now we're looking at scale more. I'm curious about these organizations and what they're learning.
Yeah. Well, the size varies. I mean, in a municipality, for example, in Sweden, the IT department can be anywhere from 20 people to 200.
Right.
We just came out of a meeting with one of our largest municipalities today, actually, and I think they're at around 200 people in IT. And of course, the healthcare sector with hospitals, most of the IT department they're pretty static. They're anything from 50 to 150 people, maybe something like that. So usually they have their own development department, their own infrastructure team, networking, what have you, basically. So,
are their cultures changing?
You mean in the terms of changing behavior? Yes, absolutely. And I think the big change is from the IT department side. That's sort of where we're seeing the largest shift. And IT departments traditionally were pretty used to just handing out IT systems or applications to users in a way that was pretty much declared and stated by them. But now when development and, as I said, container-based technology, rapid deployment, all of those stuff come into play, the development side gets a bigger say in what's happening and in what pace that is actually occurring. So we're seeing a greater demand from IT department to be able to support agile-based technology, to be able to change and shift and produce faster than ever before. So yes, there's a different behavior now in terms of how it was before and how traditional IT has been delivered. I think it's more based on the line of business and their demands, basically.
And they're looking at container architectures?
Yes. Yeah. One of the big things about containers is the ability to change and adapt and to upgrade and deliver, basically, on any scale and any pace. And so in a world where we're seeing a big shift in terms of pace, rapid deployment of software, changes to software, it needs to happen quickly. That's the way to go forward. And that's also why we're seeing such a broad adoption of container-based technology at the moment, which is a little bit surprising. But basically, now once the trend is started, it just keeps on going. Yeah.
So with container technologies and with Kubernetes comes open source. I'm curious, is there a tendency for companies still to lean towards one vendor runtime version over another, or more toward open source?
Well, the open source concept basically has sort of gained popularity, but that doesn't mean that you lean on the open source community as the provider of the open source technology. We're seeing software vendors, VMware, for example, Red Hat might be another option, delivering open source technology that is based on the software and the technology and the thought work that is done in the open source community, but handled and governed by support contracts and stuff like that. So a lot of the big vendors are taking good use of the software that's in the open source community, I think, and handling that in a more traditional way of delivery, commercial wise.
So that must mean that Atea is adapting as well. How are you adapting to new IT approaches to the concepts of DevOps and open source?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And I think I mean, I would lie if I would say that this is easy for us because we're a traditional IT provider, basically. Traditional reseller back in the 90s, came into 2000 with server virtualization and what have you. And then this happened, basically. And there's a lot of technology that we need to learn, we need to adopt, and we need to understand before we can take that message on to our customers. So there's definitely a change in the way that our employees are working with this type of technology and how we are sending that message, basically. Our team that I'm working with right now, we do a lot of internal marketing as well for new technology and broader adoption programs, basically. And a lot of the things that we talk about is container-based. And being able to adapt to that technology as well as being able to explain it to the customer is our top priority at the moment. So definitely a big change for us, and we're just seeing the start of it, I think.
That's really interesting. So, when you're thinking about that and you're thinking about your architecture, are you starting to think about, your overall kind of infrastructure operations, such as, your data center operations? I'm curious about, Dell and its role there, and, new kind of approaches that we're seeing with using Kubernetes through platforms such as VMware Tanzu.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, Atea in general has been a big Dell partner for years, and we sort of came into this engagement together with Dell in parallel with VMware, which has also been a big partner of ours for many years. So when Dell and VMware basically joined forces and said, okay, let's be Dell Technologies and let's do VMware Cloud Foundation, for example, that became a real stepping stone for us because that meant that we could leverage the Dell technology based on VXRail, for example. That's one of Dell's big selling HCI platforms where you're using a hyperconverged storage together with VMware technology. And when you can utilize that together with VMware Cloud Foundation, where there's enterprise PKS, there's VMware vRealize automation, for example, all of that technology bundled together with a certified and supported hardware stack, that really makes for a great offer. And I think a lot of the customers that we serve, may they be Dell or not, but they're sort of leaning towards a support contract that's going to be able to support them through the life cycle of the product. And when that can be combined with the software delivery, that's also supported. That's a really great advantage for us and the customer, and of course for Dell and VMware in particular.
Mm-hmm. So VMware Cloud Foundation on VXRail, maybe you could talk a little bit about VXRail itself. Can you explain it for us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, hyperconverged technology, which is VXRail is an example of that. Basically, it's just a traditional Intel-based server that's segmented into virtualization on top of it, basically. So you have a hardware stack where there's a lot of disks, and then you bring VMware on top of that for the VXRail example. VMware has ESX, as you might know, vSphere, of course, and then they have a software-defined storage product called vSAN that is deployed together with VXRail. So you get the whole stack from hardware to a disk system, basically, which serves all of the storage operations, to a software-defined storage, and then on top of that, VMware basically deploys their traditional vSphere stack. So it becomes a sort of a data center in a box concept, which has been really popular with the customers here in Scandinavia. And we're seeing a great shift onto HCI from traditional storage area networks like other vendors or even Dell might provide themselves.
Interesting. So when you think about VXRail and you think about, Dell infrastructure and, in the overall market, what do you see as adoption trends and what do you see as, the changes in data centers overall as more IT organizations move to DevOps environments, they move towards open source,
right?
They move toward Kubernetes as a way of organizing their overall application development, deployment, and management.
Yeah, I mean in general, if you talk about overall concepts, I would say the software-defined data center is really where the sort of the the pivot point came, where the market started shifting and looking into software deployments of any kind, basically. But with Kubernetes, software-defined networking, for example, is a really big thing. So when we look at NSX, for example, VMware NSX for virtualized networking, that's a really big thing, and it sort of goes hand in hand with the deployment of enterprise PKS, for example. You need NSXT, which is the new virtualization engine for networking from VMware, to be able to run enterprise PKS. So a lot of that is coming to play. People are shifting from a traditional based networking story onto something more software defined. And then when you do that and anything that becomes a part of the software defined data center comes into play, you get software defined storage, you get self-service portaling, you get automation, all of the stuff that you can get from the SDDC stack, basically.
Is the data center now more of a priority then?
Yeah, I was actually talking about or to a colleague of mine that, and we both thought a year back maybe that okay, well, if the software-defined industry doesn't really sort of rocket launch itself into space, we'll probably be out of work within 5 to 10 years. But that launch actually happened, so there's a big shift towards data center technology, and I would say that working together with those vendors and that technology that's being delivered from a software side, of course, with the software stack on top, but supported by enterprise technology hardware, it's really fun, and it's really sort of taken off from where it were 3 or 4 years ago. So that's a big shift.
Yeah, 3 to 4 years ago, what do you think happened? Was there just a need more for scale?
Well, that's one of the the $10 billion questions actually. But my take on it is basically when public cloud came into play and public cloud providers like AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud or whatever basically were launching themselves into a market, and then a lot of the customers here in Scandinavia, and I think globally, sort of adopted to the public cloud concept of purchasing services that's somewhere else but needs to be integrated. That started the shift towards the multi-cloud movement and the software-defined data center. So what we're seeing basically is small or maybe not enterprise-grade customers, mid-market SMB customers, having a need for that type of technology due to the fact that they're running multiple cloud providers and need to have a standardized service catalog and a delivery of applications and stuff like that. So I think that's the shift basically. And then of course the the global marketing campaigns that were done by the huge giants of the industry also affected it. But if you're shifting an entire global market, something bigger needs to happen. And I think the answer is multi-cloud, definitely, in the way that you can deliver applications and software to any geography, basically, in the world at any time, and having that agility.
So we fast forward to January 2020. No one expected to see a pandemic really hit us all. And now with COVID-19, what do you think is the long-term impact on your customers from that, and how will it affect the data center operations and focus on IT?
Well, that's a great question, actually. And I think besides being bored out of their skulls, just sitting at home, a lot of the the transition in the market, the digitalization of the market, if you will, has happened more rapidly than it would if COVID-19 hadn't happened. So, as I said earlier, I mean, remote working opportunities, VDI, anything that involves self-service, the ability to support an agile application deployment where you can shift and change based on a need that sort of that can shift from a day to another, and then of course just being able to sort of handle that demand that's in the industry of the app-based delivery that modern phones, I would guess, were the starting point brought to us. Everyone is expecting to be in a more of a easy ride to order an application or to order a system. And moving forward past COVID-19, I think that will be the new normal. So a lot of the digitalization work that we've been trying to push for our customers now basically just happened because of the disease that's surrounding us at the moment.
How do you think cloud native technologies will play into the plan, and how does VCF on VXRail fit into that story?
Well, yeah, I mean, cloud native in general, if you look at how applications are delivered, less and less customers are upholding these standards of a standard monolithic application. They're being pushed by external providers to use container-based technology. Basically, from a development perspective, it's much easier to develop software in terms of software upgrades, governance, lifecycle management when you're dealing with container-based technology. So I would assume, and this is a guess, but I would assume that this would be the new normal. And when you look at how Dell technologies are delivering that with VXRail on top or in the bottom of the VCF stack, that is something that could appeal to the market because it's a pre-packaged, pre-certified, and pre-supported basically technology that can be delivered in scale, and bringing the container-based or the cloud-native landscape basically to any customer, may it be a small company with 50 employees to a large enterprise with 4,000 or 5,000 employees.
So, what will this mean for Dell and Atea? What is it that you're going to be able to do to enable this self-service technology and these flexible developer environments, really, that customers are asking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, if you look at how we deliver it right now, it's all based on the VMware stack, or at least a large part of our customers is VMware based. So we're sort of coming into the game supported by VMware. And then if you take a look at enterprise PKS or the TensorGrid or whatever technology that you might want to use for container deployment and lifecycle management, you sort of need that framework that VMware was, and for that matter, it could be another provider that has that support behind it, is giving basically. So I think the way forward for us will definitely be with a large partner like Dell Technologies, and definitely with Cloud Foundation on top of the VXRail stack. That's a good way forward for us, since we are being a partner to Dell and VMware, and we can offer that partnership forward to our customers.
I love how the fact is that you serve large customers and small customers in these little towns, and
Right.
and that's a real fun part of the business. And for me, it just sees how fascinating it must be for them to see the flexibility that they have with container technologies and what it enables them really to kind of change their vision for their communities in many ways.
Yeah, and that's I'm usually, when I get this question, I say that I've never had a not dull day at work for 15 years, and it's sort of true, because everything is changing. You get to interact with a lot of customers, may they be small or big or medium or whatever, and sort of being able to provide the new technology that we can, and supporting them. Anything from small businesses to mid-market customers to large enterprises, they all sort of strive towards that ability to follow the demands of the business that themselves have. So that's a really good feeling, and I love it.
It must be there must be like excitement, there must be trepidation, there must be frustration, there must be thinking, who's going to do this work? How are we going to figure it out? It must really kind of change the patterns and the viewpoint that people have.
You said it, anxiety. And that's probably the normal feeling when you're talking about, if you never ever have seen cloud native technology, and then problems at some point you're being introduced to it and you feel like, oh boy, I thought I knew the IT market, and now this whole new kid came into town and we're being run over by this new technology that we haven't had time to learn yet. So yes, definitely anxiety, and it took us a year or maybe a year and a half to get that ball rolling, basically. Anything from sales enablement to supporting our consultants, broadening their competencies in terms of cloud native and container technology. But yes, it's a big endeavor, and it's one that really puts you on your feet, basically. So it's great fun, but also challenging, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the roles that people have changed so much when they're, doing something relatively advanced, such as continuous delivery,
Right.
and thinking, and that's why Kubernetes, and container-based architectures really have value. They allow you to continually develop, but with that anxiety and with that stress, you become, I expect, somewhat of a counselor, and you must start to see some outcomes that you feel great about. Are there any in particular that you can think about?
No, but you're right. Counseling is the right word for it, and it's a good feeling. I mean, when you can support a customer that's in need of changing their way of delivery or the way that they approach the market, definitely. And the good outcomes is when we can see. I mean, for a hospital that can deliver more efficient IT to be able to provide better healthcare, for example, that's a great way to serve the community in any way we can, basically. But yes,
that must be heartening. I'm curious on what you think about as market trends over the next 1 to 3 years, considering the times we're in now, these past 3 to 4 years, and seeing these enterprise operations, large and small, looking at container technologies. Any thoughts about the next few years?
A couple of years back, I would probably have a clear and crystal answer to that. But at this point, we're sort of taking it as we go. As I said, I mean, cloud native is the obvious star on the market. A lot of shift will come towards that focus, basically. And also, I mean, if you look at how you delivered IT, whether it be a data center delivery or an edge delivery or something else, the way that we position hardware and capability to compute at the edge, for example, closer to the end user or closer to the actual place where it's happening. If you take an autonomous car, for example, a self-driving car, that compute capacity needs to be within that vehicle. So I think from where the industry have been for a while with big data centers, I'm certain that we will see more of an agile way of approaching that market towards the vicinity of the end user rather than in the actual data center as well. So, but the container-based market together with Edge, for example, that's a match made in heaven. So there's no conflict there, and I'm just really curious to see how that develops and how we can support it over time.
Jonas, thank you so much for joining us. I've been joined for this conversation with Jonas Emilsson, Concept Manager for Hybrid Platforms at Atea. Jonas, I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. It's been good being here.